Ever get that feeling? You know when you see like a couple out together, maybe a family, and everything seems just so perfect.
Yeah, picture perfect. Right.
Exactly. It's like that carefully crafted image we all put out there for the world to see. But what if hiding beneath that flawless surface, something really dark is going on?
Hmm. The kind of thing that makes you question, like really question, how well you can ever truly know someone.
Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today. This case, it's going to stick with you. I can almost guarantee that.
It will for sure. And the case we're focusing on today is the disappearance of Ryan Carter.
Carter. Okay.
Yeah, happened in Raleigh, North Carolina, back on March 13th, 2024.
2024, so pretty recent.
Yeah, not that long ago at all.
Yeah.
And at first glance, if you were just skimming the headlines, it looked like just a tragic story.
Right, just a good guy who vanished, no trace.
Exactly. And, from what everyone said, Ryan was a good guy, devoted husband, respected firefighter, the kind of person you'd trust without a second thought.
Salt of the earth type.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the early reports, they just painted this picture of a mystery.
A real head scratcher. What happened to this guy?
Right. You might even seen those headlines yourself and thought, wow, what a terrible thing to happen.
I bet a lot of people did.
But here's the thing, and this is where it gets really disturbing. The tragedy, yeah, it's there, it's huge, but Ryan's disappearance, it wasn't some random accident.
He didn't just wander off, get lost, something like that?
Nope, not at all. He never even left his house.
Oh, wow. So right from the start, we're dealing with something deliberate.
Absolutely. This was a planned thing, a calculated act of deception right from the very beginning.
And to really break down what happened, like the whole twisted sequence of events, the truth, the lies we've been digging into, buried in deception, the Ryan Carter murder.
Great book. Really goes deep.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there, for sure.
There is, and that's our mission here today, to peel back those layers, expose the key moments, the web of lies surrounding Ryan's fate.
So that we can all get a clear picture of what really went down.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start with the image, right? The one everyone saw. What would someone, like an outsider, just looking at this couple, what would they have seen?
Well, on the surface, Ryan and Jessica Carter, they looked like they had it pretty good. 5 years of marriage, nice house, in a quiet suburban neighborhood.
White picket fence, that kind of vibe.
Yeah, exactly. The kind of place where you'd expect, peace, quiet, stability. Ryan being a firefighter, that adds to it too. Respected profession, a sense of service.
Definitely. A community hero.
Right. And then Jessica, she was a part-time yoga instructor.
So projecting an image of Zen, peace, all that.
Totally. Everything seemed, very conventional, even idyllic, you could say.
Almost too perfect, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's often the case, isn't it? Those carefully constructed exteriors, they can be hiding something very different underneath.
Like a facade, a mask.
Exactly. So the question becomes, were there any cracks in that facade? What did friends, neighbors, anyone who knew them, what did they notice that maybe hinted things weren't so perfect after all?
Well, if you start asking around, right, talking to people who knew them, a different story emerges. And it starts with Jessica.
Okay, what about Jessica?
Friends started talking about her, describing her as controlling. Like Ryan always had to check in with her, even for the simplest stuff, going to the store, whatever.
Wow, so even for little things, he couldn't just do his own thing.
Apparently not. And then there were the neighbors. They'd mentioned hearing arguments late at night.
Arguments, like yelling, fighting.
Yeah, like muffled shouting coming from the house, enough that the neighbors could hear it.
So clearly more than just your average marital spats.
Right, and at the time, maybe someone hears that and thinks, oh, just a couple having a rough patch. But looking back, it takes on a whole new meaning.
Yeah, especially in light of everything else.
Exactly. It's like those little cracks in the facade. They start to look more like warning signs.
Foreshadowing, almost. And speaking of things not being what they seem, there's another piece to this puzzle that really adds to the intrigue.
Oh, yeah, this is where it gets interesting.
It does. We have to talk about Daniel Parker.
Daniel Parker, okay.
Now, this guy was Jessica's ex-boyfriend.
Ex-boyfriend, and how does he fit into all of this?
Well, he had re-entered her life, and in a pretty significant way.
Okay, so they were back in contact.
More than just contact, they were spending time together. And here's the thing that really raises eyebrows. The very night Ryan disappears, Daniel's whereabouts, completely unknown.
So on the same night that Ryan vanishes, The ex-boyfriend just happens to drop off the radar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's not just a coincidence, right?
Yeah.
It immediately makes you wonder, are these two things connected?
It has to be, right? Too suspicious.
It's a huge red flag. It suggests something deeper, something more sinister is going on.
Okay, so we've got this backdrop of a seemingly perfect marriage that's maybe not so perfect. We've got an ex-boyfriend who mysteriously disappears the same night as the husband.
A lot of questions already.
A lot of questions. So now, let's zoom in on that night, March 13th. What do we know about Ryan's last known movements?
The last anyone besides Jessica saw Ryan was that evening.
Okay, what was he doing?
Just taking out the trash,
What?
according to a neighbor.
Hey, get out the trash.
Yep, just a regular chore like any other night. And that's what makes everything that follows even more unsettling.
It's such a mundane thing, right? You can picture it. He's just doing his thing, nothing out of the ordinary.
Right, and then he's gone.
So Jessica wakes up, finds him gone, calls the police, right?
Well, not exactly. That's where the initial story gets really puzzling.
Okay, so what happened?
Think about the scene, right? His car, it's still parked in the driveway. Inside the house, his wallet, his keys, they're on the kitchen counter.
So everything's in place, like he just stepped out for a minute.
Exactly. Even his phone was there, on the nightstand. But there's a catch.
A catch.
The phone had been completely wiped.
Yep.
Every bit of data, gone.
So it's like he vanished, but deliberately left everything behind.
Right. It's strange. Doesn't add up.
No, it doesn't.
And then there's Jessica's behavior in the aftermath. It's all very calculated, very telling.
Okay, how so?
On the surface, she's playing the part of the distraught wife. She's pleading for information, helping with searches, posting on social media.
The whole 9 yards.
Exactly. Trying to drum up any leads, make it seem like she's desperate to find him.
And I bet a lot of people bought it, felt bad for her.
Probably. It's a convincing act.
Yeah.
But there's one major thing she didn't do, something that really stands out.
What's that?
She never actually filed a missing persons report.
She didn't go to the police? Why not?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Instead of involving the police, she told her family and friends a different story.
What was her explanation?
She said Ryan had probably just run off, needed to clear his head, that sort of thing.
So a temporary thing? He'd be back?
Exactly. A convenient way to explain his absence without raising too many alarms.
But it's a lie, right? A deliberate attempt to mislead everyone.
It is. And you can see how, to someone who didn't know the whole picture, it might have sounded plausible.
Yeah, especially if they believed the perfect couple image.
Right. But the truth, the really disturbing truth is, Ryan didn't just run off. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was premeditated.
Premeditated meaning?
Meaning, Ryan's disappearance, it was a carefully planned act.
Oh, wow. So we're talking about murder.
We are.
And Jessica, she was behind it.
She was. It turns out she'd been planning this for weeks, waiting for the right moment.
And that moment came on March 13th.
It did. So what was it about that night that made it the right time for her to put her plan into action?
Yeah.
What made that night different?
Well, that night, Ryan was coming home after a 72-hour shift at the firehouse.
72 hours, so he was probably exhausted.
Totally wiped.
Yeah.
Physically, mentally drained.
Yeah, his guard would have been down.
Exactly. He's coming home, feeling safe, trusting his wife.
And that's where she saw her opportunity. She took advantage of his vulnerability, his trust.
And how did she do it? What did she actually do to kill him?
It was the whiskey.
Whiskey.
Yeah, his usual drink. She prepared it for him, but this time she crushed 3 prescription sleeping pills into it.
3 sleeping pills?
Lethal dose, yeah.
And Ryan, he had no idea, just drank it down.
No idea at all. He started feeling the effects quickly, slurring his words, his eyes getting heavy. Soon, he could barely stand.
And then she helped him to bed.
Helped him to bed, where he died. His last moments, completely unaware of what was happening, betrayed by the person he trusted most.
It's chilling. He never even had a chance to fight back.
It speaks to the cold, calculated nature of this whole thing. But it doesn't end there.
Right? We've got Daniel Parker, the ex-boyfriend, still to factor in.
Exactly. This wasn't just about the murder. It was also about covering it up. And
Sure.
Daniel, he played a key role in that.
Okay, what did he do?
Before Ryan was even dead, they'd already started planning how to dispose of the body.
So they were prepared.
Oh yeah, completely. They'd picked out a spot in the backyard, and 2 nights before the murder, Daniel had already started digging the grave.
Wow, so this was premeditated in every sense of the word.
It was.
They were determined to get away with this.
Absolutely. And, there's this quote from Daniel when they were out there digging. It really gives you a glimpse into their mindset.
What did he say?
He said to Jessica, "We can't be out here too long. We dig now, bury later."
bury later. He actually said that.
Yeah, just like that. It's chilling, right? It just shows how matter-of-fact they were about this whole horrific plan.
Like it was just another chore to check off their to-do list.
Exactly.
So once Ryan was dead, how did they actually go about burying him?
It happened in the early hours of the morning, just before 3 a.m.
In the middle of the night.
Yep, Daniel shows up at the house, dressed in dark clothes,
Yeah.
gloves, trying to avoid leaving any evidence behind.
Smart from a criminal standpoint.
Right. They wrap Ryan's body in a tarp, carry him out to the backyard, and bury him in that pre-dug grave.
And just like that, a man's life is erased.
And then, to really complete the cover-up, they put the sod back, added some mulch, tried to make it look like nothing had happened.
Like he was never there.
Exactly.
And Jessica, she just went on with her life.
She did. For 6 days, she lived in that house. Ryan's body buried just feet away.
6 days. That's incredible.
It is. She kept up the facade, went about her routine, interacted with people, all while knowing what she'd done.
You have to wonder, how do you compartmentalize something like that? How do you live with yourself?
It's a good question, and one we may never have a good answer to. But here's the thing. As carefully as they'd planned this, as well as they thought they'd covered their tracks, they hadn't counted on one thing.
What was that?
A dog.
A dog. What do you mean?
The neighbor's dog, Max.
Max, okay. And what did Max do?
Well, the fence between the Carter's yard and the neighbors, it had a loose panel.
Okay.
So on the morning of March 20th, Max gets through this loose panel, and he's sniffing around the Carter's yard, doing what dogs do. And he gets to the spot near the tree line, and he just starts digging.
Digging at the grave.
Right at the spot where they'd buried Ryan. And he won't stop.
So Max, he's onto something.
He is. He's picked up on something. The neighbor, Greg Wilson, he sees this, and he's curious.
I mean, wouldn't you be? Your dog's going crazy digging in someone else's yard.
Totally. So Greg goes over to check it out, and what he finds is pretty disturbing.
What does he see?
Freshly turned soil, which is odd given how long it had been since he'd supposedly done any gardening. There were also a bunch of flies buzzing around.
Flies, that's not a good sign.
Nope. And then he sees it, just a tiny bit of blue fabric sticking out from the dirt.
The tarp.
The carp.
So at this point, he must have known something was seriously wrong.
Oh, yeah, there's no mistaking that something is very, very wrong.
So what did he do?
He did the right thing. He called the police.
He called the police.
Yep. Reported what he'd seen. The digging, the flies, the fabric. And, when the police got there, they didn't waste any time. They started digging where Max had been digging.
And they found Ryan.
They did. There he was, wrapped in that blue tarp, his body decomposing.
And just like that, Jessica's lies started to crumble.
It was the beginning of the end for her carefully constructed facade.
So what happened next?
Well, with Ryan's body found, the whole investigation shifted into high gear.
Full-blown murder investigation.
Yep, they looked at everything, and the evidence against Jessica and Daniel, it just started piling up.
Like what kind of evidence?
Well, first they checked Jessica's phone records. And guess what they found? A big gap in her text messages on the night Ryan disappeared.
A gap meaning?
Meaning she was deliberately not texting, not communicating, likely to hide something.
To cover her tracks.
Exactly. Then they found Daniel's fingerprints on the tarp they'd used to wrap Ryan's body.
Putting him at the scene.
Right there with the body. And then the clincher, the toxicology report came back, confirming what we already suspected.
What did it say?
Lethal dose of sedatives in Ryan's system.
Case closed.
Pretty much.
So what happened to Jessica and Daniel? Did they confess?
Well, Daniel, realizing he was caught, he decided to cooperate. He admitted that Jessica had planned the whole thing, that he'd helped her bury the body.
But he claimed he didn't know she was going to kill Ryan.
Yeah, that was his story. Said he thought he was just helping to cover up an accidental death.
But come on, digging a grave before the guy's even dead? That's a little hard to believe.
Right. His credibility was definitely shaky.
And Jessica, what about her?
She, of course, tried to deny everything at first.
Stuck to her story that Ryan had run off.
Yep. Then she tried to pin it all on Daniel, said she had nothing to do with it. But when they presented her with all the evidence, the phone records, the fingerprints, the toxicology report.
The game was up.
Exactly. She finally confessed.
So what was the outcome?
Jessica was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Daniel, because he cooperated, he got a plea deal.
What did he get?
25 years.
25 years, so some semblance of justice, I guess.
Yeah, you could say that. It's still a tragedy, of course, for Ryan, for his family, for everyone involved. And The book ends on a really powerful note talking about the irony of it all.
What do you mean?
Ryan, he dedicated his life to saving people. As a firefighter, he ran into burning buildings, risked his life for others, and in the end, he was betrayed by the person who should have loved him the most.
That's heavy.
It is a stark reminder that sometimes the greatest danger can come from those closest to us.
So as we wrap this up, what's the biggest takeaway for you? What should our listener be thinking about after hearing all of this?
It's about appearances, isn't it? How easily we can be fooled by what we see on the surface.
The perfect couple facade.
Exactly. Jessica, she played the role of the grieving wife perfectly, all the while knowing the truth. It shows just how deceptive people can be.
And how we can never truly know what's going on behind closed doors.
Right. We only see what people choose to show us.
Yeah.
It's a scary thought, but it's a reality we have to be aware of.
Absolutely. It makes you question, like really question how well you can ever truly know anyone.
It does.
Well, that's a chilling thought to end on, but an important one.
It is. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone.
And remember, things are not always what they seem.
Never forget that.